Welcome to International Business News. I am Likon Onobanjo, and we start off in Asia. China's semiconductor stocks are rising as a result of Washington's latest effort to stop Beijing from developing its chip manufacturing sector because the limitations may spur support for domestic technologies. The U.S. is pressuring the Netherlands to forbid ASML holding NV from selling to China technology crucial to producing a sizable portion of the world's chips. China chip makers were one of the few bright spots in the markets on Wednesday. Investors believe that U.S. limitations are accelerating sales for domestic companies as tech firms look for onshore equivalents, which has sparked a rise in chip stocks in China, along with profits that exceeded expectations. Russia appears on track for a much shallower recession than many forecasters initially expected due to rising oil production that has blunted the impact of U.S. and European sanctions over its war in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken plans a candid discussion about the war with his Chinese counterpart during an upcoming summit in Bali. A top Biden administration official earlier urged Beijing to stop spreading Russian lies about the Kremlin's invasion of its neighbor. Economists from J.P. Morgan Chase and Company, Citigroup Incorporated, and other big banks are slashing their outlooks for the drop in output this year to as little as 3.5%, dismissing fears in the first month after Putin's invasion that it could be the deepest in generation. And away from that, worries over surging global food costs are easing as prices of everything from cooking oils to wheat and corn tumble to the lowest levels in months on increasing fiscal supplies and investors reduce their bullish bets on futures markets. Palm oil, the world's most consumed edible oil, has plunged more than 45% from its record close in April to the weakest level in a year, while wheat has slumped over 35% from an all-time high in March, and corn has dropped about 30% from its peak for the year. Investors have been reducing net bullish positions in U.S. markets as interest rates increase and the threat of recession looms larger. Their net bullish bets on soybean oil have shrunk to the smallest in 23 months. Those on wheat are the lowest in 4 months, and on corn, the smallest in 8 months. Palm oil tumbled by the exchange limit in Kuala Lumpur on Wednesday, losing 10% by the midday break and leading the losses in farm commodities. And still on recession, in the event of a demand-crushing recession, Citigroup is warning that crude oil prices might plummet to $65 per barrel by the end of this year and $45 by the end of 2023. Analysts say the prognosis is based on the fact that OPEC Plus producers have not intervened and that oil investment has decreased. The price of a barrel of Brent, the standard for all crude, was close to $113 last time. Meanwhile, due to the invasion of Ukraine, oil prices have surged this year, and banks are now trying to predict where they will be in 2023 as central banks hike interest rates and recessionary risks increase. The energy markets is now being compared to crisis in the 1970s by Citi's perspective. And now the bank's economists currently do not anticipate a recession in the U.S. A bill that would give preferential creditor status to groups of workers in Ireland made redundant as a result of the collapse of a company is an attempt to ensure that what happened to Debenhams employees can never happen again. The Irish Congress of Trade Unions will tell a Dáil committee on Wednesday. Representatives of ICTU and employers group, the Irish Business and Employers Confederation, will discuss the company's Bill 2021 at the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Enterprise, Trade and Employment. Introduced to the Dáil by Solidarity People before Prophet TD McBarry last year, the so-called Debenhams Bill would, if adopted by the Oireachtas, amend the Companies Act in 2 ways. And that's all on international business news. We go on a break now, and when we return, we will be looking at Zimbabwe's price control struggle amidst Forex shortage. Do stay with us. The conversation continues on Business Edge, and this time it takes us to Zimbabwe. Things are getting harder for Zimbabweans as producers and retailers have stopped selling essentials like mealie-meal, cooking oil and sugar, leading to shortages as the government's price controls start to backfire. The Presidential Powers Act was utilized by President Emerson Mnangagwa last week to enact a ban on shops selling items at exchange rates that are more than 10% higher than the current interbank rate. Violators of the restriction face fines of up to $20 million. Now, at the interbank rate, the local currency has been trading at 366 versus the US dollar, whereas it has been at 750 on the black market. Despite government's actions, the cost of staple foods has been rising sharply, and on Sunday, the price of a loaf of bread rose from 640 Zimbabwean dollars to 690. And so joining us to unpack this particular discussion is Prosper Chitambara from Harare, Zimbabwe, is a development economist and policy advisor. You are welcome, Prosper.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the value of the Zimbabwean dollar is said to have been less than most legal tenders, and one of the most recent measures was to sell gold coin. So has there been any headway with what the government has tried to do in order to rein in Forex issue?
No, not really. In fact, I think the local currency has continued to depreciate. I think what we are seeing is that is the continued increase in demand for the US dollar. Obviously, as chronic inflation continues to bite, the people have lost confidence in the local currency, and there is a huge demand for the US dollar, which then causes the local currency to continue to depreciate. Yes, of course, government has announced plans to introduce gold coins as an alternative store of value to the US dollar. So the expectation is that that should help to ameliorate or to moderate the high demand for the US dollar that we've seen, and that is causing the local currency to depreciate and thereby further destabilizing the macroeconomy.
All right, so we understand that the finance minister, that is Mthuli Nkumbi, said that the government was willing to that the government is not actually ready to use price controls. But then looking at what he did, he directed retailers to stick to the interbank rate when the parallel market rate was spiraling. So isn't this in some way some sort of price control?
Yeah, in some way it is actually, especially given the fact that the interbank rate, the interbank market and even the official auction market is actually failing to satisfy the demand by the economy, by industry, by producers for foreign currency. So obviously, a lot of the producers, a lot of the business people, they have to seek recourse to the black market. So they have to buy foreign currency at the black market in order to restock, in order to buy critical inputs for use in production. So if they are then having to be forced to sell at 10% plus the interbank rate, then they could actually be selling at a loss if they would have procured the foreign currency on the black market, where the rates obviously are way much higher than the interbank rate. So indirectly, it could be some form of price control in that respect, yes.
Now, we understand that last week the president used the Presidential Powers Act to enact and, of course, to evoke telling retailers that they will be banning the selling of goods and at exchange rates of about 10% of the prevailing interbank rate. So when you look at these commodities now, what would you say that the retailers were doing as at that time, before the ban, during the ban, to cope with the situation?
Well, I think it's difficult, obviously, trading in a currency that's losing value, trading in a highly inflationary environment. So, in fact, what we've seen on the market, probably it's a coping mechanism, maybe, is there's been a reduction in supply, especially in the formal retailers of basic commodities, because the cost in Zim dollar terms keep on changing, and obviously that's a major challenge for most producers and for most retailers. And of course, we are in a multi-currency regime, and retailers can sell in US dollars, but no one would buy in US using the US dollars. Why? Because there's that option that you can change your US dollars on the black market and then come and buy in the formal retail shops using the local currency after you have actually changed your US dollars at the black market, where the rates are much higher than the rates that are actually being used by the formal retailers and the formal economy.
Well, we understand that the Zimbabwean government is coming up with different measures to address the currency issue, but then was the ban the only option available for the government?
Well, I think the options are really limited. I think what's needed is just to do a proper diagnosis and identify, of course, we know the major drivers of the chronic inflationary trends and developments in the economy. The issue of high levels of money supply, high levels of Zim dollars that are actually circulating in the economy that have created excess demand. And obviously that excess demand is then driven or stoked up inflationary pressures. So of course it's difficult because there are pressures on government spending. Next year, there's going to be a general election. We had some by-elections this year, and obviously that puts pressure on government spending. So I think the pressure on government spending is there and it's increasing, especially in the run-up to the election next year. And the way government has been financing that now is resulted in broad money supply in general actually increasing. And obviously that has also had a destabilizing effect in terms of the general macroeconomy. So we need to ensure greater fiscal discipline as well as greater monetary discipline. But the challenge is that the pressure on government spending remains very, very high. The government is also under pressure to increase the wages and salaries of civil servants, because government has announced a 100% increase, which has been rejected by a section of the civil servants unions. So I think that there are a lot of those pressures on public spending, which are contributing to the stoking up of inflationary pressures in the economy.
So what about the Zimbabwean retailers? Are there any alternatives for them to source for Forex?
No, the only alternative, apart from the official, obviously, is to go to the black market. So that's the only alternative. And we are saying the black market rates are way higher. The premium is actually widening. So if you source for your foreign currency on the black market and you have to sell using the official exchange rate, it actually means that you are producing at a loss. So to cut on their losses, some may then opt to reduce production.
All right, so finally, Prosper, we understand that violators of the restriction face fines of up to $20 million. Now, do you think that the government has the will to follow through that threat?
Well, it's difficult to really enforce that, especially given the high levels of informality in the economy. So a lot of the economic activity is actually taking place within the informal economy. And obviously, it's difficult to police and to regulate the informal economy.
All right. Thank you so much, Prosper, for joining us on Business Edge. Really appreciate your presence.
You're most welcome.
And so that is what obtains in Zimbabwe, with retailers struggling to get Forex and the prices of staple foods rising higher. Well, maybe those measures put in place by the Zimbabwean government would bring about some sort of succor to the people. Well, we get to find out even as the day goes. But then that is a huge challenge that both the government, the retailers, and everybody within that space, we need to come together to find a way to solve, so that at least the people, most especially the citizens of Zimbabwe, can have some relief while having to purchase food and purchase the staples that they need to survive. We'll quickly run off on a break now. We have a report for you. We'll bring that to you after this short break.
Malawi. Officially, the Republic of Malawi is a landlocked country in the southeastern part of Africa. Malawi is among the world's developing countries, where about 85% of the population live in rural areas. The economy is based on agriculture, and more than one-third of the GDP and 90% of export revenues come from agriculture. Agriculture accounts for 35% of GDP, industry for 19%, and services for the remaining 46%. The poverty rate in Malawi is decreasing through the work of the government and supporting organizations, with people living under the poverty line decreasing from 54% in 1990 to 40% in 2006, and the percentage of ultra-poor decreasing from 24% in 1990 to 15% in 2007. Many analysts believe that economic progress for Malawi depends on its ability to control population growth. The main agricultural products of Malawi include tobacco, sugarcane, cotton, tea, corn, potatoes, sorghum, cattle, and goats. The main industries are tobacco, tea, and sugar processing, sawmill products, cement, and consumer goods. The industrial production growth rate is estimated at 10% as of 2009. Beginning in 2006, the country began mixing unleaded petrol with 10% ethanol produced in-country at 2 plants to reduce dependence on imported fuel. In 2008, Malawi began testing cars that ran solely on ethanol, and initial results are promising, and the country is continuing to increase its use of ethanol. As of 2009, Malawi exports an estimated $945 million in goods per year. The country's strong reliance on tobacco places a heavy burden on the economy as world prices decline and the international community increases pressure to limit tobacco production. Indian hemp is another possible alternative, but arguments have been made that it will bring more crime to the country through its resemblance to varieties of cannabis used as a recreational drug and the difficulty in distinguishing between the two types. As of 2012, Malawi has 31 airports, 7 with paved runways, 2 international airports, and 24 with unpaved runways. As of 2008, the country has 797 kilometers of railways, all narrow gauge, and as of 2003, 24,866 kilometers of roadways in various conditions, 6,956 kilometers paved, and 8,495 kilometers unpaved. Malawi also has 700 kilometers of waterways on Lake Malawi and along the Shire River. Bettina Unweli for News Central TV.
And we say happy Independence Day to Malawi. And before we go on the show, let's take you through some top stories that we are tracking on NC4 to watch. On NC4 to watch, let's tell you that the price of animal feed in Kenya has shot up to historic levels as attempts to ship in yellow maize to curb the rising cost flopped, with millers citing a shorter import window. The government opened the import window for duty-free yellow maize last November and is expected to close it at the end of October. The millers Moving on, the strategy work plan to expedite the concession process for the 700 megawatt Zungeru hydroelectric power plant in Niger State has been approved. Nigeria's National Council on Privatization recently approved the strategy and work plan to expedite the concession of the Zungeru hydroelectric power plant. On other stories now, several technical issues with the electronic tax filing platform of the South African Revenue Service have caused huge frustration amongst taxpayers and tax practitioners, which were resolved after a few days. Filing season started last Friday and ends on October 24 for non-provisional taxpayers who have not been auto-assessed and on to 23rd of January 2023 for provisional taxpayers and trusts. Finally, the South African government has ignored a plea for assistance from the nation's leading inbound tourism organization for urgent intervention to unblock a bureaucratic debacle that is strangling the industry. The SA Tourism Services Association CEO, David Frost, said that the organization is disappointed that it has not heard from anyone from the national to the provincial government. And that's about it on NC4 to watch. Tolu will wrap up the show now.
Thank you so much, Leka, and thank you always as much as possible for joining us as well. Don't forget that at the top of the 12 o'clock hour, News Central now comes your way with the latest right here on the continent and beyond. Follow us on social media, download our mobile app, and of course, watch us on the platforms we're available on. We also like to continue to wish Malawi a happy 58th Independence Day. You can join Rita Omordia on the conversation later today at 5 p.m. West African time as she looks into issues surrounding Malawi's independence and, of course, the growth of the country and the progress being made in the past 58 years. This is News Central, where we put Africa first. I'm Tolu Lokwe Adelaru Balogun.